Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm so grateful for our Fan Tech um, events manager for starting us off with music. I believe that we all want to go to that sunny side of the street and see some blue skies ahead. So, really delighted that you're with us today. Thanks for taking the time out of the Seahawks game. My name's Elise Tigoyer. I'm Executive Director of Faith Action Network, and we are just moving forward quickly into the legislative session that begins tomorrow. And in some ways, it's already begun, and that's kind of new for us. We are just moving quickly to catch up before it's even launched. It's truly launched. So um, we want to share everything we know today in a efficient way. So I'm just going to jump right in. Um, as we gather, I just want to take a moment. We've been doing this last year, and it's really appropriate for us that we need to take a moment and remember that FAN is a multi-faith movement of faith communities from across Washington state. We're Buddhist, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Sikh, Unitarian Universalist, and people of conscience. We celebrate our religious diversity and the unique wisdom that each faith tradition brings to our work for justice. In this time when white Christian nationalism is on the rise, our multi-faith organizing is more important than ever. We invite you to join us in these practices as we continue to deepen our relationships among diverse, faith traditions. So, to start, let's foster a spirit of curiosity and respect for the different faith traditions that motivate our advocacy. Let's use inclusive language that reflects our multi-faith identity. For example, we traditionally speak about in FAN about faith communities, a phrase that includes members coming from synagogues, mosques, churches, fellowships, meetings, sanghas, temples, and other groups. It's a practice for us, many of us who say church more often. We say faith communities. Let's recognize we need each other in this work for justice. To echo our annual dinner theme, United in Hope, let us lift up what unites us. And as we continue our work together for the well-being of all in our state, let us know we need each other. So Kristen Ang, our policy engagement director, was invited by the Speaker of the House to invite an imam and a rabbi to open the session tomorrow. So I'm happy to report that on behalf of FAN, Rabbi Seth Goldstein at Temple Beth Hatfiloh, which is part of FAN's network, and Imam Omar Kadura of Islamic Center of Olympia will be doing that. And you can watch online on TVW if you'd like to hear those invocations. But for our gathering today, I'd like to start with an invocation that our FAN board chair, Carol Jensen, gave last February on Interfaith Advocacy Day over in the House, because I think her words are just as apt and wise as ever. So let's take a moment. Creator and sustainer of all that is, we give you thanks for this day and for your infinite and unfathomable love. In the midst of all the intensity within and around us, give us a moment of pause to remember why we are here. You have given human beings the responsibility to make laws and allot collective resources so that all that you have created may flourish. Remind us this day that laws are tools to help carry out your commandment, which comes to us through our varied religious traditions. And that is the commandment to love our neighbors. Remind us also of your desire for justice, especially for those who have been denied the rights, the resources, and the opportunities that have belonged to some, but not to all. May the lawmaking that happens in the chambers of the legislature in Olympia reflect your will, O God, that we find ways to live in harmony with one another and our planet home, recognizing the dignity of all. On this day, help us to remember our neighbors near and far and those we serve. Open our hearts to hear their pleas for justice and for compassion. Give us tough minds and tender hearts. Renew our strength for this challenging work and be with the families of those who give so much to our capital, to our government, to our legislation. With humble hearts, we pray in the name of the Creator of all. Amen. So, our agenda for the day is simple. We're going to hear first from our Policy Engagement Director, Kristen Ang, an overview of the session that begins tomorrow. And we're going to make room for you to ask questions after her presentation. And then we'll meet in breakout rooms according to the category of bills on our agenda that you are interested in. You can choose your own breakout room. We've invited some coalition partners to be with staff in those breakout rooms to provide more information about the bills or highlight strategies and have more discussion on what is needed to pass those this session. We'll come back at 4:10, and while we won't have time for report backs, we hope that if you have questions or notes that you'll either drop them in the chat for your breakout facilitator, or staff members will take some notes and we'll follow up the best that we can to continue to communicate about the session. Please feel free this whole time to use the chat to raise your questions along the way. And we'll also drop some links in the chat that will get you to more information. All of our information is being updated on the website right now as we speak. Our web curator is with us on this call, and she has Danielle Circati from Yakindo Web Designs and has done the best with what she had to get all the fact sheets and legislative agenda and bill tracker updated. And it is a work in progress and will continue to evolve. So thank you so much for being here today and for your advocacy. And without further ado, here is Kristen Ang.
Well, good afternoon, all. I'm Kristen Ang, FAN's Policy Engagement Director. I am so thrilled that you are here with us today, getting ready to advocate for the 2024 legislative session, which I'll always call the espresso session because it is short, intense, and fast. How we choose our priorities is we collaborate with you and very closely with multiple statewide coalitions to advance progress for underserved communities, advance racial justice, and our other multi-faith values. To give our session priorities encompass a wide spectrum, ranging from housing initiatives to ensuring accountability for oil companies and environmental protection. Our legislative agenda includes support for rent stabilization bills to limit yearly rent increases and a proposal to rebalance the real estate excise tax to create a sustained funding source to build affordable housing across Washington state. Our commitment to equity is evident in our advocacy for tax reform, addressing income inequality through measures such as the extreme wealth tax and expanding the working families tax credit. Additionally, we are championing a guaranteed basic income pilot programs, striving for parity in healthcare and unemployment benefits for undocumented immigrants, and asking for funding to support newly arrived migrants, while also strengthening public safety and police accountability and supporting mental health care for youth. On the environmental front, our focus extends to enhancing transparency in oil companies' pricing strategies, holding them accountable for price gouging. We also aim to integrate environmental justice into the permitting process. So if you want to stay updated on these critical developments in the Capitol, please follow us on social media and subscribe to our e-news and alerts. And with that, let's get started. And I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Does everyone see a PowerPoint? Yes. Let's advocate to make change. And so, like I said, the 2024 legislative session, a 60-day short session, is scheduled to commence on January 8th and ending on March 7th. As a supplemental budget year, It will focus on updating the operating, transportation, and capital budgets from the period from 2023 to 2025. The Democratic Party maintains a majority in both the House with 58 seats to 40 and in the Senate with 29 seats to 20 with the Democratic Governor Jay Inslee. Looming over this legislative session are the 6 ballot initiatives from Let's Go Washington, and that is funded by mega millionaire Brian Haywood. Now, these 6 initiatives would actually undercut the work that FAN has been doing all these years, which is they want to repeal the capital gains tax, which funds education and child care. They want to take out the Climate Commitment Act, which raised 1.8 billion to find clean energy solutions and take away long-term care coverage for seniors, as well as making draconian police vehicular pursuits and making our communities less safe. And so I'm going to start with our economic justice section. We believe that all people and communities have a right to resources and opportunities to live a full and meaningful life. And we pursue systems and policies that end oppression and intersectional inequities. We believe this section is very important because we need to reform our upside down tax code, reduce income inequality so that we have funding, so that our other legislative agendas can be funded. We partner with the Washington State Budget and Policy Center, Balance Our Tax Code, and Statewide Poverty Action Network to identify policies and priorities in this section. And that includes expanding the Working Families Tax Credit. Now, we have been working on this for many years, and we want to expand it to all lower income working young adults 18 and older and seniors over 65. Under the current statute, households without a qualifying child are subject to the 25 to 65 age restriction. And now this results in most young adults, workers, and working seniors being excluded from the credit. We believe that there is such a need for cash assistance in this time, and we should include young people as well as seniors that are struggling. And by passing this particular bill, House Bill 1075, we will increase the number of eligible households by nearly 50%. The new legislation that we have this year in the economic justice front is the Washington Gift Card and Accountability Act. And this would allow consumers, this comes in 2 bills, and this would allow consumers to cash out gift cards under $50 and close the loophole to ensure that unspent gift cards are returned to consumers or used to fund public services instead of being kept by corporations. Right now, probably the biggest one who uses this is Starbucks. And this would raise approximately $2.5 billion over 10 years for public health, education, and housing. We also will continue supporting the Guaranteed Basic Income pilot projects, which would establish extra cash for people experiencing economic insecurity, as well as House Bill 1473, the Extreme Wealth Tax, that would put a 1% tax on financial property over $250 million in financial assets. There are actually over 100 billionaires in Washington State, and I think this one, I'd have to remember if it was 700, 900 households that will be affected. But there are quite a number of very extreme wealthy people in our state. We also want to disrupt generational poverty, and that's why we support House Bill 1084, called the Washington Future Funds, or nicknamed the Baby Bonds. And this would mandate the state to invest money for every child in AppleCare that they could use as adults towards homeownership, education, or entrepreneurship. We promote economic justice so that we can fund our social safety net. And we establish these priorities with the Anti-Hunger Nutrition Coalition and Northwest Harvest. And this means investing a one-time allocation of $15 million in our WSDA Emergent Food Assistance Program. As you all probably know, our food banks have an increased need. In fact, in 2023, new client visits to food banks increased 33%, and all client visits increased 29%. We also need to invest $15.2 million per year to sustain healthy nutrition for low-income seniors and people with disabilities through the Meals or On Wheels and Meals programs via the local area agencies on aging. This is because the portion of seniors living in poverty have risen dramatically. We also will continue to advocate to expand nutritious school breakfasts and lunches for all elementary school children. We are also advocating that families on TANF, temporary assistance for needy families, keep their child support. Right now, the state keeps 50% of family child support payments. And we believe that families in deep poverty should be able to keep 100% child support. And now it's housing. In 2023, that year was called the Year of Housing for legislation because of middle housing, and the legislature passed some bills to make sure that we were able to build more affordable housing, but they did not pass tenant protections or rent stabilization. For this particular section, we partner with the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance. For this year, we are looking to increase the real estate excise tax, REIT, to secure a permanent funding source for affordable housing. And this means taxing about 1% more for properties above 3 million. We also support eviction protection for people in licensed long-term care, as well as increasing funding to the Housing Trust Fund to create affordable housing. And lastly, we would like to improve housing stability for tenants by limiting rent and fee increases, requiring notice of rent and fee increases, and limiting fee and deposits, and establishing a landlord resource center, and making sure that the Attorney General can have the enforcement to do so. And this is House Bill 2114 and Senate Bill 5961, which you all can sign in pro for this week. Now, more about preventing excessive rent increases. This particular bill would cap rent increases at 5% each year with a required 6-month notice. We are doing this because rent increases have forced over 136,000 of Washington households to move in the first 6 months of 2023. And there have been rent increases over the past few years, but definitely in this last year alone, there was rent increases of over $250 a month for 350,000 Washington households. And studies show that for every $100 in median rent increases, this leads to a 9% increase in homelessness. More about the REIT mechanism. Like I said, this would add a 1% increase to any portion of a property sold for over 3 million. But this particular bill would actually decrease or reduce the real estate taxes for most properties sold in Washington because it will exempt the first 1 million. And that is most people. Most people's houses are actually 1 million or below. And this would actually create $200 million more to fund deeply affordable homes through the Housing Trust Fund, homelessness services, and the development and operations of permanent supportive housing programs for people with disabilities. Now, moving on to fostering public safety and civil rights. We collaborate with the Washington Coalition for Police Accountability, WCPA, the Attorney General's Office, along with Disability Rights Washington and others. The first 3 bills are from the WCPA, which is House Bill 1513, Traffic Safety for All, which would end stops for non-moving traffic violations to reduce disproportionate impacts on communities of color. House Bill 1445, AG Investigations Reform, would empower the Attorney General's office to take action on systemic civil rights violations at law enforcement agencies. And House Bill 1579, independent prosecutor would create a state office to ensure fair and transparent prosecutions. Leslie Cushman from the WCPA is here to lead that breakout session, because we do need to maintain or strengthen our police accountability and safety. On the rest of this particular legislative agenda, we have the Nothing About Us Without Us, House Bill 1541, sponsored by Rep. Daria Farivar and promoted by Disability Rights Washington, which would ensure that meaningful participation from people with direct lived experiences are actually on the committees that make laws. We also support Indigenous communities in Washington by the implementing since time immemorial curriculum, House Bill 1332, as well as asking for more funding for the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and People Task Force. We also are advocating to increase security grants, funding for nonprofits and faith communities, as we have seen an increase an increase in people with violence, hate, as well as defacing our faith communities. We're also wanting to address the rise in anti Semitism, Islamophobia, racism, and xenophobia in our state. Our next section is reforming our incarceration system, and we partner with Civil Survival. I'm glad that Kelly Olson is here today from Civil Survival to lead this breakout session, as well as with ACLU and Multi Faith Restorative Justice Coalition and others. The first one on here is solitary confinement reform, and we'd like to restrict the use of this in state correctional facilities and long term private detention facilities, just like the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma. We also are supporting House Bill 1325, which is reevaluating sentencing for emerging adults. This would allow qualifying persons serving long sentences committed prior to 25 years of age to seek review for possible release. We also support House Bill 1174, improving access and removing barriers to jail-based voting. This would require plans by the county auditor and procedures to ensure the right to vote for incarcerated individuals. And we'll also continue addressing legal financial obligations for those exiting prison. On to healthcare. We work with Healthcare is a Human Right, Healthcare for All, and NAMI Washington and Children's Alliance to advocate to expand healthcare. And one of our first bills, our bills and budget asks, is to improve the 988 behavioral health crisis system. We'd like to mitigate police response to behavioral crisis calls, especially in BIPOC communities and youth, expand mobile response units and crisis response facilities to all regions of the state, and ensure that behavioral health crisis services are culturally sensitive, language appropriate, and trauma informed. We also have heard you and many others that we need to support youth mental health. And this is why we put this in the legislative agenda, because we know the pandemic has definitely affected this. And we want to expand mental health services in K through 12 schools and college campuses and increase the availability of youth mental health services, including inpatient beds, crisis response, outpatient services, and wraparound support, and with particular attention to the mental well-being of youth in marginalized communities, especially BIPOC, trans, and LGBTQ youth. We also will continue to advocate for the Keep Our Care Act, which would Senate Bill 5241, which would ensure that health entity consolidations improve rather than harm access to affordable quality care in a community, including gender affirming and reproductive care. I want you to know, from last session, we advocated for the SHIELD law. We testified on that, and that is now currently being used by Children's Hospital because they sued the Texas AG because they want records of those seeking gender affirming care so that they can prosecute. And the laws that you are helping pass are actually helping protect people and preserving their health care. I just wanted you to know. The next section is environmental. And we work with Earth Ministries, I'm very glad that Sarah Robinson's of Earth Ministry is here today because they are who we collaborate with, along with Front and Center and the Environmental Priorities Coalition, which consists of members like the Washington Conservation Action and Climate Solutions. And the top bills for this year are holding oil companies accountable, clean school buses, the Washington Recycling and Packaging Act, as well as a new one here, which is the CURB Act, the Cumulative Risk Burden Pollution Act. And this is basically to integrate environmental justice in the permitting process, because we do need more teeth in this. This would require monitoring of pollutants that affect health but are not currently addressed. It would specify communities that have been disproportionately harmed by pollution for specific protections and elevate the voices of community members through frontline community participation in the permitting evaluation process, as well as require the Department of Ecology to deny new permit applications that add cumulative pollution effects. A lot of the times there are these equity indexes, equity maps, a lot of, speeches and resolutions. But when these projects come up that pollute in the same communities over and over, they are often approved because the laws have not changed. And this would be a very revolutionary legislation to address that. Now, to go further into basically the WRAP Act, or we call it the Rewrap Act because there's more details to it now. This is to modernize our recycling system and shift the responsibilities to those that produce the packaging and to make sure that what the packages are actually recyclable. For clean school buses, that's House Bill 1368, this would fund the transition of Washington's 10,000 diesel school buses to electricity, helping both climate change and children's health. Now, this holding oil companies accountable, addressing gas prices, this is tied also to the Climate Commitment Act and likely to the ballot initiative to repeal that. The oil industry made over 200 billion of profits in 2022, and that was before the Climate Commitment Act was even enacted. And so, in some cases, they are using that to say that you're having higher gas prices or that's why they're profits. But we need more transparency, accountability, and ways to address these oil companies because other industries are already regulated and are transparent, like natural gas and other utilities. And we just want the same thing for oil companies so that they do pay for their pollution. And lastly, on our legislative agenda is to advance immigrant and refugee rights. The first one on this list is the unemployment benefits for undocumented workers, which would create a permanent separate unemployment system for undocumented workers to access benefits their labor already accrues. Everyone already pays into this, including those that are undocumented, but it's a fairness issue and an equity issue that they actually get to access this. We have been part for many years of the Health Equity for Immigrants campaign, which would expand critical health insurance coverage for adults who are ineligible for federal assistance due to immigration status. There are over 100,000 undocumented Washington residents that are uninsured. And this is perpetuating racial disparities because 46% of undocumented immigrants in Washington identify as Hispanic or Latinx, and 37% identify as Asian or Pacific Islander. And federal restriction limits affordable health coverage options for undocumented immigrants. This is why we're working through the state, and we asked for the waiver. And because of your advocacy last year, we were able to get $49.5 million for a Medicaid-like program, as well as $110 million to continue the exchange premium assistance starting this year. This resulted in undocumented immigrants able to purchase on the exchange plan for coverage for 2024 for those that are 250% below the poverty level, as well as for those undocumented immigrants with 138% of the poverty level. They are eligible to apply for Apple Health in July of this year, but capacity may be limited. And that's what we're advocating for, to make sure that the capacity is not that limited. We are asking for more funding so those that are eligible can get that funding for healthcare. We are also asking for $25 million to help support newly arrived migrants, as well as funding for legal and emergency services for immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. Thank you so much. And I wanted you to save the date to advocate with us in person in Olympia for Interfaith Advocacy Day on February 8th from 9 to 3 p.m. And I guess it's time for questions. Now let me stop. Okay.
And if you could use the raise hand function, so Kristen can easily see you and respond to your questions.
And also know you can ask questions in the breakout room as well, with our experts who are actually of the coalitions that primarily move these bills, as well as they're the ones who came up with this policy and connect with others. But I see John has his hand up, and what is your question?
Yeah, probably a dumb question. How can we get a written copy of what you've just presented? You did a nice overall tour de force of interesting and important legislation.
Well, we are fortunate. I rely on a lot of good plan staff members for this, that our legislative agenda is on the website.
Okay.
And then on that website, as well as one-pagers for these issues if you want to know in depth. And I must tell you that you don't have to know these issues that in depth. Like y'all's like, I can't talk to my, legislator. Yes, you can. You can just say, I support this bill, and that's good enough. And then relay your experience because they want to know from you, the people in their district, what they're experiencing and what your concerns are. They can always have the experts, the people in the breakout rooms, the leaders, but they want to hear from you. So just know it's on the website, this legislative agenda, as well as the one-pagers to know in depth about these issues. We also have a bill tracker there. So you can even see the bill number, a short description of the bill, as well as where it's at in the session. I think Karen and then Virginia. Hello, Karen. Oh,
I forgot to unmute. I was a little bit shocked when you stated that the state keeps 50% of child support. Why is that? I mean, that just seems like it should not be allowed.
I know,
Yeah.
Karen, I know that. There have been, ever since I've had this job, I've been surprised at some of the things where we think that shouldn't those that are formerly incarcerated have access to certain SNAP benefits? Shouldn't those that are age blind and disabled not be made to pay back when they reach SSI because they're very low in income? Well, apparently that's not the case. We actually have to advocate for things that seem reasonable, that seem moral and just for some of these bills. And so this particular advocacy is just to make sure that people struggle less. And I guess it was a way to say like, hey, since you're getting child support, here's a way for us to pay for it, pay for TANF through you. When really they should be saying, hey, this billionaire should be paying more into our system so that we can actually fund these projects. So that's
they're the people that need it the most. And
exactly.
the state's taking it away from them.
And I would love for people to sign in or email their legislators that, hey, this is top of mind for me. Because sometimes in this session, things can get lost. And what are priorities? Like people probably thinking Climate Commitment Act, which I think is a great priority. But at the same time, these things that affect a certain number of families means a lot to them.
Mhm.
And it doesn't get the headlines. But we do know that this is a very meaningful legislation for those that receive child support, but then have to get the state takes half of it. So
Yeah.
we'd love to see the support from the Fan Network on this.
Yes, that just shocked me.
Virginia.
Yes, I was glad to see that you mentioned Let's Go Washington. Will you be providing more background information to fight against these initiatives and to take to our congregations and say, here are the reasons why you should be sure and advocate against this, not vote for it, and that sort of thing?
First, I'm going to say for the next 60 days, we will be focused on the legislative session because it is very short and it's very fast. I would maybe direct this to our executive director, but I do believe we are going to come up with language, but it is can I direct it to you, Elise?
Sure. I'll just say that those 6 initiatives have not qualified yet. So that's the process right now. And I heard the Secretary of State say in early February, they hope to have the signature count to see which ones qualify. After that, we will discuss it as with our governing board because we need to either, support or not. I mean, not support. It's a governing board decision because it's a campaign, right? It's a little different than supporting a bill. It's supporting a ballot initiative or working against a ballot initiative. So as soon as we have endorsement from the governing board, then we will work with coalitions to provide information. So absolutely, Virginia, yes. And we have a long history of working on initiatives, and we're just going to wait until it goes through the cycle.
Yeah,
Also, Kristen always explains very well what the legislature has 3 options, right? if you want to explain that, Kristen.
Oh, the legislature has three options. If these are validated, the legislature has three options, meaning that there are 320, I want to say 324 or 326,000 valid signatures. Is to accept it, to say like, oh, you know what? You got the signatures, we accept it and we'll turn it into law. Or to put an alternative on the ballot. So there will be two things on the ballot based on an initiative. Or simply just say, we're not accepting and we're not putting an alternative and we'll just run against it for you to say no to this. I did want to just say that, particularly for the capital gains tax, FAN has been working through the years to get this done. This is a generational project, and probably the Economic Justice Group will talk about this. And the Supreme Court did say that it was constitutional to have that 7% tax for those sales that are over 250,000 and above per year. And that affects households whose income is usually around 2.7, 2.9 million per year, which is not a lot of households. And that has actually raised in its first year almost $1 billion, about $900 million that goes to education, childcare, et cetera. And I believe that, or at least I can say because we don't know yet what the FAN board will say, but to defend that would really, we do need to defend that, because some of our legislative agendas is tied to getting funding. Some of our priorities, our legislation needs funding to be successful. So thank you.
Thanks.
And if there are no other questions, we can get more time into our breakout sessions or get that going, because I know it takes time to arrange and organize people.
Well, thank you, Kristen, for once again synthesizing so much information. It's a short session, but we have just as long an agenda, and we like to say right now it's like the session hasn't started, but we're already out of the gates. So now's breakout time, really important time that we want you to have. Alex, who I don't think I named when I thanked her for the music before, but Alex Robinson, our events manager, is putting together the breakout rooms. We'll have 8 options. There they are on the screen in those areas of our legislative agenda. If there's something on our legislative agenda that we don't have a breakout room for, we just didn't have a staff or resource person for it, but we can answer more questions if you leave them in the chat or follow up with you. So there will be either a coalition partner and or a staff person in each room to provide a little bit more detail about the bills than Kristen had time for. So a little bit of presentation, but most importantly, a time to allow you to ask questions, to discuss with others what it will take to get these bills passed. And we also want you to be able to surface the ways the bills affect people in your communities, or your knowledge and your expertise that you bring to working on these issues, because those stories will be critical in our advocacy, and we hope you'll share them every time you write or speak or testify. So we'll have 25 minutes, maybe even 30 now to do so. We'll come back at 4:10 to close. As I said before, we're not going to have any report back because that would take too long with all of us on the call. But please raise up any notes, concerns, maybe corrections to our information that you want to share. And you can either share them with the breakout person or in the chat, or you can mail them to fan@fanwa, and we will follow up with more information. And nobody's asked, but we are going to make this video and these resources and slides available to whoever wants them, so you can do education in your own faith communities and do some follow-up. Sound good?
Mm-hmm.
I think if we're ready, then Alex, you can open the breakout rooms.